at something. Colm Tobin was in town for a talk up at the university, so we had dinner together. He's great, yeah.
Say hello to him for me.
I will.
And his son.
Yeah, I never met his son. His daughter was there that night, so that was good.
Yep.
Okay, so now, let me just make sure. Yeah. Okay, so welcome everyone to our discussion with our friend Larry Kirwan. We had him on during COVID to talk about his book. Oh God, The Blue Sky. What's it called, Larry? Your book?
Rockaway Blue.
Rockaway Blue. Yeah, I knew there was blue.
I had to think of it too.
I know, yeah, that's terrible. Terrible. Of course, he'll be known to most of you as a member of Black 47, a very popular band, a US rock band since the late 80s. We're not dating him too much, but very, very famous. He's from Wexford at home in Ireland, and he is now entering another phase of his life. He's a real Renaissance man. He's conceived a musical, wrote the music for it, and co-wrote the book for a fantastic musical called Paradise Square, which is set in the historically notorious slums of Five Points in Lower Manhattan. Set during the Civil War, which of course, was a dark period both for the country but also for that neighborhood, because Irish immigrants and freed previously enslaved people and free African Americans lived together in what was one of the worst slums, not through any of their own fault. It was actually built on a marsh. So there's good points to Five Points in that there was a lot of collaboration between the two groups. It's where apparently American tap dance was formed because of a fusion of these two cultures. But unfortunately, there are the very violent draft riots in 1863, which kind of pit immigrant workers, we'll say, or working class people against the idea that maybe freed slaves would come north and steal their jobs. And of course, working class Americans or New Yorkers were being used, in their opinion, as cannon fodder, because there was talks of conscription coming in, and if you had $300, you could buy your way out. So this musical has been nominated for 10 Tony Awards. We're so excited for you, Larry. And the museum actually is organising a trip if anybody wants to come with us from the Albany region. On the 8th of June, it's Wednesday, we will go to a matinee performance. So the bus leaves Albany at about 8 o'clock. We're actually going to go, I'm a historian of New York City history, and I'm going to give a very quick walking tour of the actual Five Points area, which is in modern day Chinatown in Little Italy. And we'll get something to eat, and then we'll go for a 2 o'clock show and come back up. So all of those details are on our website or Facebook. So welcome, Larry, and thank you for joining us tonight. We're delighted to have you.
It's a pleasure, Elizabeth. Great to be back in the capital.
That's it, exactly. Yeah, pity we can't do it in person. But we might see you in Manhattan the day of the show, please God.
Yeah. I'll try and come.
Good. So, so tell me what brought you to this. I said in my introduction, you are a Renaissance man, and we had you talk about the book Rockaway Blue, which was beautiful, very touching book about such a, of course, quintessential New York story, 9/11 and the Irish immigrant group there. But what drew you to, first of all, the whole idea of 5 Points and the draft rights, but also even to write a musical?
Well, I was a playwright before Black 47 for some years, and then we formed Black 47, and to our surprise, it took off really quickly. And so I kept on writing, but I was always writing a play during the 25 years of Black 47. So I've written 19 plays and musicals at this point. But I couldn't totally devote myself to the writing, because Black 47 played roughly 100 gigs a year. And we were recording, and we were involved in the whole political thing. So it took up a lot of time. But the idea for Paradise Square, or as it was known originally, Hard Times, came back in Wexford from my grandfather. I was raised by an old grandfather in the town of Wexford. And it turned out that he'd had a best friend named Ned Cudahy. And Ned and his family emigrated to New York when the two boys were 10. And they made a vow that they would stay in touch with each other forever. And lo and behold, Ned never wrote back from New York. And even 60 years later, this still cut at my grandfather, but he had learned to forgive Ned, and he would always say after he spoke about Ned that poor Ned, he probably got lost in the 5 points. And as a young boy, I was thinking, what are these 5 points? And when I came to the US and emigrated here, I was living on the Lower East Side, which is just up from the 5 points. And I found I could go down there, walk down there, and see the remains of what was left. A lot of it is gone because the courthouses are built on top of it. But I used to walk down Orange Street, which is now called Baxter Street. And when you walk down there, on one side, the street is still kind of the same as it was. So I was able to pick out the African American dance halls and houses of ill repute and all the different places. So I got really interested in the subject, and at that point, I used to hang out in the secondhand bookstores around Greenwich Village. It was a cheap thing to do. You didn't have to buy, and they got to know me in them. And in the Strand bookstore, which is still there, one day I came upon a book that was, I think it was called A History of Lower New York. And there were etchings in the book of the African American dance halls. And I knew this is where the Irish went to dance. And at first I was interested in the bands. What were the bands like? And it was always an interracial band, two Irish, a fiddle player and usually a singer, and two African Americans, a banjo player and a percussionist. So I used to try and figure out what kind of music were they playing. And it occurred to me that the Irish fiddle player was playing jigs and reels, and the percussion player was adding different styles of rhythms than this guy would have gotten in Ireland. And then the banjo player was riffing off what the fiddle player was playing. But then I began to study the faces of the dancers. And they were often in line dancing, holding hands like that, but always looking at each other. And I could tell that the artist was trying to show something. And what he was trying to show was that these people were in love. You could tell by the look on the faces. It was just so strong. There was a joy in each other, looking at each other. And that beamed across the centuries to me. And I was onto it then. And I thought, there was amalgamation going on between these. And I'd heard the word before, but I hadn't really understood it. And then when I started to research it, I found out, they were actually called amalgamationists, these Irish and Black couples. And they were hated by the uptown Protestants, which the Irish Catholics call the uptown establishment, because they didn't like African Americans very much, but they hated Irish Catholics. So what was going to happen, they felt, was that New York was going to be subsumed with brown Catholics. This was something they didn't want. This wasn't their idea of what America should be. And then I had the idea that this would make a great drama, because I knew that the whole thing fell apart on July 13th, 1863. So when you're writing drama, it's always good to have a time factor in there, a clock ticking. So I knew that I could, set up a set of circumstances, put the people in a bar. The bars down there at that point tended to be owned by African Americans, because they were in the in the 5 Points first. And they accepted these famine Irish in. And the famine Irish, as they were called, weren't even accepted by the Irish who had come before them. It was kind of felt they were letting the side down because they came diseased and starving, no money. And they kind of wrecked the town too because they came in such numbers. And New York was a small city at that point that they, there wasn't enough housing for them. So they were sleeping in the streets, and so they weren't popular, but the African Americans accepted them. And when they started to make a little bit of money, which usually came from the women, and one thing I didn't understand at first was that more women came during the famine years than men, for whatever reason. And part of it too was that the women could usually get jobs fairly quickly. They weren't great jobs or anything, but they could get jobs as maids and scullery maids and washerwomen in the big houses uptown. There was always jobs of that nature. But for the men, it was really hard because they came from very rural backgrounds. Quite a lot of them couldn't speak English at the time. And then all of a sudden, they're thrown into the city. And the writer Pete Hamill once said to me that when an Irish person got off that boat down at the bottom of Manhattan, they saw more people in the first 5 minutes than they'd seen their whole lives before that. Because most Irish people who came here at that point came from rural areas, and they didn't move between the areas either. They tended to grow up and live and then die within 10 miles of where they were born. Mm-hmm. So, and then a lot of other Irish guys left because they wanted to do something, work in a rural environment. And then in 1849, the gold rush started. And so a lot of them left for California, which left a big surplus of young Irish women. And the way I look at it is that the whole system broke down in Ireland during the famine years. The priests didn't come with them, or very rarely did. So, and a lot of parents didn't come with these young women either. So for the first time, these young women were masters of themselves. They could do what they liked. So they have a Saturday or a Sunday night off. They had a little bit of money. They came down to the 5 Points and they went to the African American dance halls. And there they met nice looking young black men who were very mannerly with them because most of them had Southern backgrounds. And they probably didn't drink as much as their Irish boyfriends would have. And it was a step up the social ladder in ways because the young black men mostly had jobs as waiters or as coachmen or whatever. And this was a step up the ladder. Mm-hmm. And that's what happened from 1845 till 1863 in a big way. And then the riots broke out in 1863. And that's the basis of the story.
Mm-hmm. So, like, I have loads of questions, but I'm actually going to show some pictures just so that people can get an idea of what you're talking about too. So this is a very famous painting of 5 Points. You've probably obviously Larry seen all of these. Mm-hmm. And like, what's fascinating about it, first of all, the amount of people, as you say, I think this was actually 1836 or something, was even a little bit before the famine. But like, there's clearly black and white people in here. There's pigs running around. You can see like the groceries all sell rum, or that kind of thing. So all of these are bars as well. And then the interior, basically, this is when the Irish come. So that famine, one entire landlord's plantation at home in Ireland, in Kenmare, actually, in Kerry, were over a number of years like evicted out 1,500 people. And they all took lodging down there on like what's now, as you say, Baxter Street, or along the front of what's now Mulberry Park. And the whole thing, so, but of course, people were dying. These were coffin ships. This was Lord Lansdowne's estate. And when
Right.
the first ship landed, some of their clothing had disintegrated. He gave them no supplies for on board the journey. So, as you said, like, they're landing kind of naked. And then again, these stereotypes. So look at the apish kind of faces, the simian
Yeah.
featured Irish. And again, like the chaotic scenes, whiskey, look again there, liquor, grog. So 5 Points is depicted from almost the get-go, like as this kind of free-for-all place. This is another one that, so you can see like the African-American lady, the Irish lady with her shawl, and then these little tumble-down houses,
Yeah.
you know. It's that, so in the old brewery, we'll talk about all of these in a minute, but like people jam-packed in. This was one of the first apartment buildings built in the city. And like this is what the housing was before they built those. It was these wooden framed
Yeah. Wooden frame.
homes,
And
And of
if you
course then
look,
all the gambling and stuff.
yeah, if you're able to see outside my window, because I'm just west of Broadway, so the 5 Points are over that way, about 4 or 5 blocks over, and outside my window is an old alleyway, and I've seen pictures of what was here before. Those kind of shacks were here.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
then after the Civil War, which kind of ended around 1865, then in 1866, these buildings started to go up, more substantial ones, but
Yeah.
still the alleyways are there,
Yeah.
where the,
And they kind of used it as an excuse, like to clear the slums. I think um, I'll just quickly show. So, like here, this one fascinates me. So you were saying about the bars. Like, look, this woman drinking in the middle of the day, a child going to get alcohol. This is a rum shop, and here's this man is black. The picture mightn't show up very well there, but and that is what actually kind of drove people mad. That's all I have of 5 Points for the moment, but it drove them mad that they were mingling like that. And I can't remember, there's that series of essays. I think it's the book edited by Lee, uh, Joe Lee, and maybe
Joe,
um,
yeah, yeah,
I can't. There was two historians involved in it. It's something about New York, making New York Irish or something. There's an essay in there by John, who is the head of the Chinese Museum downtown, the one that caught
yeah,
fire a couple of years ago. And
right.
he has a statistic in there that in one parish in the Lower East Side, 6% of the marriages were between Irish girls and Chinese men for exactly the
Uh-huh.
reasons that you said there. And there's another story about African Americans and Irish. The chapter before it is about the African Americans and Irish. But it was absolutely a step up for Irish girls, because a lot of the time the Chinese men owned either a restaurant or a laundry, or a tea importing business. They took the lady's name, and a lot of the times they converted to Catholicism. So it was, kind of a step up in one way for both of them. But it's a fascinating tale down there of this cooperation that's happening despite the kind of efforts, to stop it. And as you said, the absolute distrust of Catholics. I think we forget sometimes how bad that was
It
throughout the
was
19th century.
horrendous.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
when you go on June the 8th, when you take that walk down by the 5 Points, you'll see Columbus Park is there, and that was the center kind of the 5 Points. But even still, there are a lot of immigrants in the park. You'll see
yeah,
them. Most of them are Asian immigrants at this point, but I spend a lot of time over there still, because you kind of feel the roots of New York, and how America is basically an immigrant country, and
yeah,
we sometimes forget about that.
yeah. So do you want to talk then about the draft riots and, what happened?
Sure, yes. Well, the the draft riots basically were caused by President Lincoln. He didn't mean it to happen like that, but in order to get the conscription bill through, and remember, the riots happened a few days after the end of the Battle of Gettysburg.
Yeah,
But there was so much mistrust in New York of the Union side, because they've been hearing we're going to win these battles, and then they wouldn't win them, and we're getting false news. So the word hadn't really seeped through into New York that it was an actual victory at Gettysburg. So Lincoln wanted conscription to come in because so many people had deserted from the army, and the losses, of course, were huge on both sides. And he felt that he could finish the war in one big punch. But he'd been saying this for 3 years, so the people weren't that pleased about it. But in order to get the bill through, he put in this provision that if you paid $300, you didn't have to go. And this enraged the immigrants because $300 was a year's pay. And at the same time, and you'll see it in the musical, African Americans, although they wanted to fight, weren't allowed to join the army. In New York, in certain states, they were. I think in Massachusetts at this point, they were allowed to do it. But states kind of went their own way, and a bit more than nowadays, even. So there was a march uptown, and part of it was anti-draft, but the other part of it was a lot of immigrants had come here and had expected to do better than they were doing. And I think the Germans and the Irish were pretty well organized because Daniel O'Connell had organized them for 40 years before this. So they knew how to turn out people. And the Germans, quite a number of them were the beginnings of socialism. So on this Monday, July 13th, somehow or other, and nobody can say exactly why, New York closed down and everyone came into the center, or came to the bottom of Fifth Avenue and started to march up Fifth Avenue. And some of them were heading for the draft headquarters because they felt that if they got in there, they could stop the draft itself from happening. And one of the fire brigades, as we call them in Ireland, or fire engine groups, and the Irish at this point, many of them are running the fire engine groups. They were actually called the Black Joke. And they, up until then, people in the fire department weren't drafted. Now, all of a sudden, they get word that they're being drafted, and they set fire to the draft headquarters. And then they realize what they've done. Oh, we're firemen. We got to put it out. But the riot had started at that point, and there was a lot of problems with the immigrants. There was a black orphanage over on 42nd Street, or 44th Street and 5th or 6th Avenue. I can't remember which it is now. And that got set on fire because a lot of the immigrants felt their children weren't being looked after, but the black children were. So a lot of scores started to be settled, and the gangs.
Yeah.
One of the things we all forget is that the gangs started up their war again because now the Irish gangs had a chance to finally take over from the nativist Bowery Boy gangs. And so that war was going on. So there was confusion all over the town, but there was no army there or no civil guard to stop it because they had all been moved to Gettysburg for the battle. And a huge amount of the Irish, of course, were fighting in Gettysburg on the Union side. So everything went out of control here, and nobody really knows exactly what happened. But 11 African Americans were hung. That's for definite. Who did it? We don't know. The amalgamationists were kind of fair game too. So a lot of them had to leave the city, and they moved into black communities in New Jersey, Staten Island, and Long Island. So there was a movement out of the city of black people and of the white and black families, and the um, the riots went on for 4 days, and eventually the army from Gettysburg, led by the Irish brigades, got here and stopped the riots, and that
Yeah,
changed America.
it did. It changed New York. You know, I read somewhere that I forget what the percentage of the population of black people was beforehand, but it dropped to less than 10% at this point, and it took decades for it to even climb up at all. It really wasn't until the Great Migration in the 30s that it started to kind of come back, which is amazing, you know, when you think about how fundamental at the time enslaved people, like, you know, during the Dutch colonial era, like how many black people were here in comparison to white people for centuries, you know. So it
Yeah.
was a terrible time.
The other thing too is that the dance halls
Yeah.
closed. The African American dance halls closed,
Wow.
and so uh, basically the thing was everyone went back to their own. That was the
Yeah.
phrase. The Irish went back to their thing, and the African Americans went to theirs. And within a generation, these young Irish women who had radicalized everything, they went back. Not them, but the next group of young Irish women were conservative again. And what
Yeah.
what happened to the others? Who knows? They kind of melded into black neighborhoods, and but when I got into it first, I used to look on the trains when I would be traveling on the subway, and nobody's kind of supposed to look at anyone else, kind of. But I would always be studying black people, and you
Yeah.
would see all types. You see blue eyes,
Yeah.
you see the genetic
Features.
traits of the
Hmm.
Irish in there,
Hmm.
and it
Well,
was
we've had
always
people come into the museum from the city and have said, like, you know, my great grandfather or my great grandmother was
yeah,
Irish, and they might have only had one Irish, you know, ancestor kind of thing, and sometimes the name is still an Irish name, you know,
yeah,
but and they're very proud of their roots, you know. But when they come in first, you're like, oh, you know, do you want to be here, you know,
yeah.
like, so it's great that they are aware, you know, of their background, some of them. Um,
There's a great organization now. It's called African American Irish Diaspora.
yes, yeah, yeah,
AIDN, AAIDN,
yeah,
and I've been at a couple of their meetings, and
yeah.
they're really proud of their Irish background, and
They are, you know.
they claim that up to 37% of African Americans have some Irish
Irish.
DNA in them.
Yeah, that's amazing, you know. And it's not all through, you know, the slave owners or
No,
plantations or it, you know, some of it is hopefully loving relationships, you know, willingly entered into kind of thing here in the city and up in the north, yeah.
well, one of the great things about Paradise Square is that the play or the musical is that the actors, and there's 35 actors in it, and they're basically split down the center, white and black, and they inhabit the roles so intensely that within 5 minutes you're back in the 5 points, and you're seeing these unions coming together, and it's kind of amazing even for me to watch it, because I get swept up in it, and then even though I conceived it and everything,
Yeah.
I'm in the middle of it, watching it and thinking, oh my God. And
Well, so that's what I wanted to talk to you about next. How did it go from, you know, this idea in your head and it's probably ticking along in the back of your head for 30 years, you know, to conceptualizing it? Like, who did you collaborate with? Did you have the music first, or did you have, I mean, you obviously had a little bit of the story first, but and then how much of it did you have to, you know, kind of let go of and give somebody else the dialogue or the story, you know?
well, luckily, it wasn't just an idea. I did a musical called
Oh,
Hard Times with the same characters, and we did two productions of it in a small theater on 23rd Street. So the characters were there, and the story was
was there.
basically there, and that got a great review in the New York Times. And a guy came to see it called Peter Ledon, and he showed up every night, and he had a background in theater, and eventually he said to me, I have this producer associate friend of mine, Gart Trabinsky, who had done so many Broadway productions. And he said, would you mind if I send him the material? Because I think he'd be really interested in it. And Gart got in touch with me straight away and said, come on up to Toronto. So I went up there and he said, I've been looking for something like this because I've done 2 big musicals on this subject of black and white. One was Ragtime, and the first one was Showboat. And
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I can, if you work with me, we can turn this into the 3rd musical about this. I was thinking, really? And so we began to work on it up there, and he wanted a big show. And as he said himself, he's Jewish. He wanted to see all the schmutz.
Yeah.
Yeah, he wanted to see the draft rights. I had the 6 original cast members kind of in one location with the riots going on around them all the time. That was the original plot. But he wanted to see what was going on out there and to have much more dancing. And so I came up with a number of other characters, including a black preacher and an Irish woman who marries him. And they're also running the Underground Railway at the time. So then he brings in the great choreographer Bill T. Jones, who I'd always wanted to work with. So it was like a dream come true. And we teamed him up with an Irish step dancing group called Hammer Step. And Hammer Step, not only, they'd all worked in river dance, but they'd broken off to do their own thing. And part of their own thing was to incorporate hip hop dancing with Irish dancing. So I knew they were the ones to work with Bill because they were forward looking in their thoughts and their way of doing things. And that worked out. And then he brought in Moises Kaufman, who's a famous director. And we brought in other writers, a guy called Craig Lucas, and eventually a black woman playwright, Christina Anderson. I'd always wanted the center of the piece was always a black woman. And that was because when I came to New York first, I spent a lot of time in after-hours bars. And they're kind of weird when you think of it now because you didn't go out in New York in those days around 1 a.m, and then you went to a regular bar, and then at 4 o'clock you went off to an after-hours. And those after-hours were invariably run by black women. So I had the opportunity of seeing the way black women could really run things because it was a fairly rough crowd would be coming into these places, but the black women effortlessly were able to keep order, and yet at the same time where everybody would have a great time. And there was one in particular up in Harlem I used to go to. Her name was Rose, and it was called Roses. Of course, there was no sign on the door or anything. It was just a door. You had to have a certain knock to get in and everything. And I spent a lot of late Saturday nights up there with Rose. And so I knew what I wanted in a black woman running it, because then you could have white people and black people in there. But that was the way the 5 Points was too, because black women were allowed to own things in the 5 Points because nobody else wanted to own anything there. Because as you said, it was on a marsh, so a lot of it was sinking, all the time.
Well, and I was thinking how progressive in one way 5 Points at the time, it was that there was this amalgamationism, going on. And we talked a little bit maybe about like the fusion of the dances. There was we showed it in our film club here, Steps of Dance or Steps of Freedom, a documentary about Irish dance and the evolution, but also the partnership with African American dancers, to form this new kind of American art form, this tap, so. And now when you're talking about your musical and the cast being hip hop and forward looking. It's like an echoing, sort of. So is it a traditional music in terms of the form of the music and dance, or is it Hamilton a bit like where we're using modern medium to tell an older
Well,
story?
remember I was talking about the etchings
Mm-hmm.
I saw of the band. So there's the Irish fiddle player and the African American banjo player and African American percussionist, but there was also an Irish singer, and
Wow.
I was always thinking, what could he have been singing? You know, and it was always a guy, never a woman.
Wow.
And what could he have been singing? And then I began to think, what was the most popular music around at the time? And it was Stephen Foster.
Yeah.
And Stephen
Himself an Irish
Foster,
American. Mm-hmm.
yeah, from Derry.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Stephen Foster was actually living in the Five Points at the time too, and going to the bars and everything.
Wow.
He had given up writing, as it was called, plantation songs at the time. He was doing other songs because he felt they were too demeaning or they were being taken out of context and made really demeaning to African people.
Mm-hmm.
So when I conceived Hard Times, I used some of my own music too, but basically I was taking Foster's songs, which had become parlor songs.
Mm-hmm.
They were just different, and taking them back into the rowdiness of the Five Points bars and seeing what they would sound like then, and then moving them forward again into modern times.
Oh.
So I was using songs like uh, uh, Gentle Annie and um, so many of them, I just can't think of the
I know,
names.
yeah. His big ones, like didn't he do the old folks at home and all this?
Old Folks at Home,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
was a
Mm-hmm.
big number in it, and
Oh,
Camptown Races.
yeah.
In fact, it
Because
opens
a
the
lot of the
camp.
entertainment, of course, was blackface. I'd forgotten that, in the 1850s and stuff, it was Irish people in blackface in theaters, so
And you know
yeah.
why? You know why that was? Irish people and black people, the uptown Protestants wouldn't pay to see an Irish person or a black person, but they would pay to see them if they were wearing blackface.
Blackface, yeah.
So the
Wow.
black people had to wear blackface too.
Right, yeah. It's
So
amazing,
in
isn't it?
Hard Times, it opens with the with Camptown Races and a black guy in blackface and a white guy in blackface
Hmm.
dancing in a competition with each other. And
Hmm.
how tap came about was these contests between the champions became huge affairs because a lot of money was being bet on the outcome of the wins. So picture the two champions, the Irish guy and the black guy. Irish guy comes out and he does his Irish step dancing and gets a big round of applause. Now the black guy can he's allowed to imitate the Irish guy to show any idiot could do this. And then he would go and do his Juba African American dancing. So that's round one. Round two starts that the Irish guy now can imitate the Juba dancing. Any idiot can do this, but
Wow.
step dancing is where it's at. And this goes on for 3 rounds. So over the years, a new form of dancing evolved through these competitions.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like, it's such a great story. And so before I hand it over to the audience for questions, and if any of you do have questions, you can type them in the Q&A feature, or you can at the end unmute yourself to ask it. Um, was it exciting collaborating with all these people, like, or did you feel a little bit nervous because you'd had this baby Hard Times and you'd had the idea of fermenting, and I suppose it's you're telling an American story in one way, but in the other way it's also about Irish immigrants, and and then to have the African American experience being told too, like that's a lot of cooperation, that you're trying to navigate there. Did you, was it exciting or was it nerve-wracking?
Um, it was hard in ways because there was a specific message I was trying to get across. And luckily, after all the jigs and the reels, as they said back home,
Yeah.
it's
It's part of
still
the fun.
there. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
still there in Paradise Square now.
Yeah.
This thing about this unity happened once and it can happen again. That
Yeah.
was the core message. So keeping that there, because you're going to have to go through great friendships, the friendship getting torn apart during the right before the draft riots, then during the draft riots, people are pulled much further apart, and then for me, it was really important that they come back together again at
Hmm.
the end. So there is hope in it. So that was one of the hardest things, keeping that story there.
Yeah.
As regards the rest of it, it was hard sometimes. As you say, it's your baby, and you're dealing with people who are really good at what they're doing. So you have to
Hmm.
really take that into account
Hmm.
and uh, sometimes try things that you feel aren't right, and
Hmm.
sometimes they work and
Okay.
sometimes they don't, so
Yeah.
there's a lot of give and take.
Yeah.
It
Well, and
was
I
hard.
love the tagline on the poster. I just had to check it. An accidental society held the promise of what America, could be.
Could be,
And
yeah.
so it's, yeah. And here we are, 100 and how many years later, still hoping maybe to live up to that promise. But
Well, the
no.
interesting thing about this is we didn't have to put anything specific in, say, about politicians getting in there and riling up people, which is the same thing that's going on now. We didn't have to name any names. What
Yeah.
happened back then is the exact same thing that's happening now.
Yeah.
And uh, in fact, sometimes we played it down because we didn't want to be
Yeah.
making it seem like you're trying to make a point all the time, because
Yeah.
that's not a story then. We wanted the story to be really strong.
Hmm.
And a lot of these people that were working on it are excellent storytellers too.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so it was a great big collaboration. But that's the name of the game on Broadway, is collaboration. So
Yeah.
there are times you just step aside. Like basically, I stepped aside so that Christina Anderson, the black woman playwright, so that she could come in then and really tell the story of the black people from her point of view.
Hmm.
I mean,
Hmm.
Nellie was my original creation, but that was me looking at Rose up in
Yeah. Yeah.
Harlem in the bar. But how well did I know Rose? I
Hmm.
knew her on a Saturday night
Hmm.
or Sunday morning at 6 in the morning. I had deep
Yeah.
conversations with her, but what was she doing the rest of the week? But I'll tell you one thing that really strange had happened at the first preview in New York. I was sitting next to um, an elderly uh, African American lady, and we just got talking, and she was talking about the characters, and she was talking about the Nellie character in particular, and she's saying, uh, "Where did you get this woman from?" And I said, "I got her from Roses up on 147th and St. Nicholas." She said, "Oh my God, I live across the street. I knew that place
Oh,
so well."
yeah,
So
gosh.
yeah, all
Hmm.
these coincidences
Yeah.
happen.
And tell me about the Tonys. That's amazing to be nominated for. Obviously, you're going to be going. I don't. When are they on? It might be next
Uh,
year, is it?
no, June 12th.
Oh, June. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
God, that's
June
going to be an
12th.
amazing night. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we got nominated for 10 Tony Awards. I mean,
Yeah.
God
And you were
knows,
only playing on Broadway the last not even 3 months since March,
not
right?
even 2 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
'cause we
Gosh.
closed down for 2 weeks with COVID. So
Oh, I know. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, please be open on the 8th of June when we come
I
down.
hope so.
Yeah.
And I hope the audience comes down, because uh, it's a really special show. And I say that even though I conceived it, because so many people have had their finger and their hand in it. It's not really my show anymore, but
Yeah.
it's very special. And everyone says it when they see it, that they're
Hmm.
moved by it. And
Hmm.
it's wonderful to see Irish dancing and African American dancing effortlessly come together, so
Hmm.
that Irish people are doing African dancing and Africans are doing Irish dancing. And
Hmm.
it just shows how these things could happen. And there's
Hmm.
one special moment in it, I find, and it only lasts for about 10 seconds. There's this beautiful African American dancer and Garrett Coleman, the Irish dancer, they catch each other's eyes.
Hmm.
And they've obviously seen each other on the street, and there's an attraction. And the African woman kind of comes over and gives him a little bit of a push, saying, I'm the best dancer here. And he goes, "You are? That's what you got." And they do this thing, and they share this moment together through dance, and you can see why they amalgamated. It was the dancing brought them together. That took away all the barriers between them.
Hmm. Well, and as you said, like it was such, I mean, it's such a historically rich time. We neglected to say it earlier on, but the abolitionists in the early days, a lot of the Irish, because Daniel O'Connell at home in Ireland, sent this manifesto over to New York and Boston to urge Irish Americans, to work against slavery and to that how could they see themselves as Irish, and hold their black brethren kind of like in low esteem. So there's all that. There's the cultural stuff. It's one of our viewers just recommended a book, Paradise Alley by Kevin Bacon. Yeah, it's a long time since I read that.
It's a
Um,
wonderful book. I know Kevin. Yeah,
yeah, and what's his Peter Quinn's
Peter
fabulous book,
Quinn.
Vanished Children of Eve. If
Yeah.
anyone watched, I used to love. There was a TV show called Copper, which was a little
Oh
bit
yeah, Copper.
inaccurate,
Yeah.
but I loved it.
Yeah.
Very. And Martin Scorsese's Gangs of New York, which is
I agree.
set around the time. Like they kind of amalgamate a few things. It's a little bit but visually absolutely beautiful and very accurate for the poverty and the direness that was Five
Yeah.
Points. And yet these people are, they did an archaeological dig in the late 90s, and they found Jewish things in it, because it was always an immigrant area. And
Yeah.
so,
Very,
and they found Irish little crosses and teacups and African American artifacts. So the point of the archaeologists were saying, even though this was known as the worst slum in the world, these
yeah.
people were trying to make their lives better. They were working. Yes, there was crime, but there was also just families going about their business and trying to beautify their homes in these slums. So how we look at poverty, and all of those things, and of course the things were stored, long story short, in the World Trade Center, and we lost it in 2001, but they had been all catalogued. And I
Yeah.
think it's a very interesting, there all those books of light and shadow in New York, and you've got these guided tours of the brewery, and as you said, these Protestant reverends coming down and kind of kidnapping
Yeah.
black and
Totally.
Irish Catholic children and putting them into industrial schools because they look like they're not being supervised. It was a tough neighborhood, from all angles, and yet
Yeah.
there was life and love happening too.
Sure. Yeah.
So if anyone wants to ask a question, you guys, you can unmute yourself. I'm not sure how to do that. Maybe I'll be able to do it. Hang on one tick. Oh, I opened the wrong thing. So, or just type in a question if any of you have any questions. But there should be a way where you can, allow to talk. I can allow you all to talk. So,
Yeah. Look
but
for your
you
little
might have to put up
microphone.
your hands. Yeah, yeah. Oh, good. Yeah. So Kathleen is up. Am I allowing you, Kathleen? Wait one tick. I got to figure out how to do this. Maybe you didn't ask for it, Kathleen, but you can talk. You're not muted. That's Kathleen Dillon McHugh. I don't know. I might have just pressed buttons by accident.
If
So,
you look on the bottom left hand side, you'll see a little microphone. It usually says mute or
yeah,
unmute
she's
on that.
off mute, I think now.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, and let me just check. So anyone, yeah, raise your hand if I'm not getting to you. And then let me see if there's any questions on YouTube. No, there are not. Okay. So we don't have any questions, Larry. I'm surprised. They're normally a talkative bunch. Now, I will say somebody said they were very proud of you and congratulations. Kathleen Murphy says so proud of you, Larry. It's an amazing feat because we talked a little bit about Hamilton, but it's I'm trying to think of any other Broadway musical that puts the Irish front and center. Considering we've had Rich, you would say, they could have written one about Tammany Hall, or which maybe wouldn't have
Yeah.
been so flattering. But for Irish that were kind of the backbone of the city there for a while,
for a
There's
long
not a
time.
lot
Yeah.
culturally, yeah.
But one of the great things I think about this show is that we introduced the Irish language in it, and that's the first time on Broadway. There's not a huge amount of it in there, but it's there, throughout
Yeah.
it, and and everyone in the show is urging me to put more Irish in there, which is
Wow.
strange. I thought they
Yeah.
thought just the sound of it made it authentic.
Yeah.
There's even a bit of cursing in Irish in there. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, and a lot of the famine era immigrants would have been Irish speakers, so and then
Yeah,
we would have kept like so many of the words. I forget the name of that book. It might be, how the Irish invented slang. I probably made up
yeah,
that title, but a lot of New York slang is
it.
Irish. It's Gaelic words that have been kind of bastardized.
I have that one. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Mary Beth said she would ask a question, but she's starstruck. So I think,
Don't
you know,
worry,
if,
Mary.
if you guys can't come with us on the 8th, but I would urge you to book tickets before they're sold out. We have orchestra seats, so they're really good seats. There's no kind of markup on them or anything.
That's
We're
great.
taking a bus, taking a bus from Albany at 8 o'clock in the morning. You can either, be free until the 2 o'clock show or come with us to 5 Points. And maybe, Larry, you might even come to meet us at 5 Points
Yeah,
if we can't do the show. And
sure.
then we can either eat together or do our own thing, and then the show is at 2. So I'm very excited for it. It's my favorite period, I have to say, of history. 19th century
Oh,
New York
great.
is amazing,
Yeah,
and to see your work and the collaboration, I think it'll be beautiful. Did I
yeah.
leave anything out? Was there anything else you were supposed to talk about? Are you going back to writing novels now after this, or
No, I'm
you'll ride this
novels
way
are
for a while?
novels are tough.
Yeah. Do
They
you
take
find them
all.
worse? Yeah.
I find them harder than plays. I suppose because I came up as a playwright
Yeah.
and changed to novels at one point. I mean, I love doing novels, but oh man, you really have to put the time in with the
Yeah.
novel. Well, you
Yeah.
do have,
Yeah.
of course, you have to with the play too. But the plays don't seem as hard to me as novels.
Yeah. Well, I suppose it's more immediate action because you're writing dialogue. You're not writing the bits, like the
Yeah,
explainer bits aside from stage directions. So yeah.
and of course, with a play too, is you're writing a lot of dialogue, but at the same time, you're trying to cut it. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
get get it to the point and get it so that the actor has control of it. So
Yeah.
you're basically handing over your word to an actor after at a certain point.
Yeah.
But I
Did you
actually
sit?
do.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I do like doing musicals because there are not that many gigs out there anymore, and I'm not sure I want to actually get out on the road anymore. I did so much of it. Um, so to combine plays and songs as you do in a musical, it utilizes two um, crafts that I've mastered in some form or other.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so I actually feel fulfilled in doing them.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I was going to ask you. Actually, I know you didn't direct it. Was it
No.
weird? I presume you sat in on rehearsals and workshops and all that. Did you have to? Oh no, no, that's not how we would pronounce that, or that's not the rhythm of this sentence. Did you have to coach them with dialogue, or?
Um, I wouldn't. I mean, I coached all the Irish characters
Mm-hmm.
um, because we didn't have a dialogue coach. We had one before, and I found it was a certain style that I
Mm-hmm.
didn't like, so I kind of took over that side of it.
Yeah.
Um, but then it wasn't that I was hammering things into them. It was basically going for a drink with them and
Yeah. Yeah.
talking
Yeah.
through what it was and saying the way I would say it, and then they
Yeah.
would listen to the way I would say it, and then they would try it in their own form. So I wasn't trying. I'm not one of those people who it has to be right. I mean,
Yeah. Or your
occasionally,
Wexford accent.
yeah, with a Wexford accent, how could I?
Yeah.
A lot of people think that the actors are from Ireland, which I think
Oh,
is great. Yeah.
that's great. Yeah. Yeah.
Some of them, anyway.
Yeah. Well,
There's
I'm
very
so
skilled.
excited to see it. And you know, as I say, well, where with it, I hope it'll play. Do you know how long it will run? You know, well, now that you're nominated for Tonys, the sky's the
But
limit, I suppose.
it's hard to say because with the COVID, that's what I'm
Mm.
saying. Get down to see it on June the 8th because you never know, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
If it has to close down again,
Mm.
will there be enough money to start it up again?
Yeah, it's sure it's
Because,
a huge, it must be massive to shut
uh,
it down and bring it back up. Yeah,
yeah, because
yeah,
you still have to keep paying everyone through it.
yeah, yeah. And
So
that's a big cast. 35 people on stage is big. Yeah,
huge,
yeah, yeah,
but they're all so good. It's like
yeah,
I can't get over how good these people are. You know, they they swing the show now. It's not the
yeah.
writers, right? They've
Yeah,
taken
yeah, it's
control of
out
it,
there
and
now. We put a little clip, you know, we got it from your website, from the theatre's website, and it's on our Facebook page and the Evite for coming to the show. It's amazing, like how, I mean, it is a real Broadway musical. You know, it's not something that was conceived. You know what I mean? Like it's a proper,
yeah, it's
beautiful musical. Yeah,
it's in a way it's old style.
yeah,
You know,
yeah. It's
it's
kind of
that
like Les Mis for 5 points.
yeah,
You know?
in a way because well, that's Gart's background, Gart Chabinski,
Is it? Yeah,
having done
yeah,
Ragtime and Showboat and
yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah.
Kiss of the Spider Woman, all those different plays.
Wow.
So
Hmm.
it's his imprint on it. It wouldn't have happened without him.
Yeah. Well, you know, thank God you had the idea and let it marinate in there for decades, you know, but mhm.
For all the
And
beer, for
it's
all the
like
beer from McGeary's.
yeah. But it's so good, you know, to, as I say, like to tell this story and not to just have Phineas Rainbow, not to just have like the negative aspect, because I think a lot of people know about the draft riots and assume, you know, that it was Irish people who were racist, and they don't know about the earlier episode, you know, where there was massive cooperation and communication, and I think that's important, you know, that you can kind of see, you know, people being manipulated like in the 1860s. And as you said, different things, different priorities for different groups, you know. So, yeah. But anyway, thank you so much for joining us tonight, Larry.
It's a pleasure, Elizabeth. Yeah.
And we'll see you on the 8th. I'll be in touch with you, so I'll let you know when we land, you know, in 5 points
Okay.
itself, if you want to come on that bit, or if hopefully we'll see you at the theatre. But thank you very much. Congratulations. Well deserved. They're all saying best of luck at the Tonys. We'll be watching. They're going to be televised, so we'll be watching that on the
Yeah, it'll be
12th.
televised.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'll be there in my
They're, in
tuxedo.
your tux, I know. You'll be like, but it'll suit you. The
Look
tux will be
out.
beautiful. So, and thank you everyone for tuning in. We are back. I better check when we're back. The 1st of June, I think, is our next talk. We've got Dr. Lindsay Erner Byrne, I hope I've got her name right, from Ireland, and she'll be giving a lecture on poverty in early kind of 20th century Ireland. She's just released a new book. And actually, my last night at home in Ireland, she was she had put on a documentary at home in Ireland about the widows of 1916. So she's a really good, accomplished historian at home in Ireland. So that's our next thing. And then we're going to New York on the 8th. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
So we'll see you then.
I'll see you all
Thanks
there.
very